This is Katie, co-host of Coffee with Keith and Katie. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hi, this is Emily.
This is Lindsay.
And this is Elizabeth,
co-hosts of Beauties and Headcanons here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Once you are done with this episode, we hope you'll come check out our show, Beauties and Headcanons, where we talk nerdy to you about fandoms, fan fiction, and all pop culture for nerds that you can think of. A new show comes out every Friday.
Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Beauties and Headcanons. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey guys, this is Nicole Kelly.
And this is Sarah Tuberty.
And you're listening to Disarming Disability.
We're going to get better at that, I promise.
We will get better at this. We have so many more episodes to get better at it as we sit next to each other and make this happen.
Yeah, awesome. So awesome. So we're so happy you're here. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be a part of this really important and powerful conversation.
I have kind of a deep, thoughtful question for you that I want to throw at you before we get started. I haven't prepped Sarah for this at all. So
I'm ready.
Last week, I spoke at a college. And at the beginning of my conversation with college students, I always start by talking about identity. And I break it down into two categories because I just want people to, naturally people think about themselves. And I know that not everybody in the room on these college campuses have a disability. So the categories I break them up into are identities you were born with. So I am a white woman, right? And I grew up in the Midwest. These are, all things about me. And then the other one is identities that you choose to take on or you choose to acquire. We actually play a game to figure out what people's identities are that they're born with versus ones that they kind of choose to grow into. Fun. And at the last college that I was at last week, there's a really, really thoughtful college kid who was asking the best questions. There's always one who's much more thoughtful than everybody else.
I feel willing to go there.
Yes, who's willing. That's exactly the right wordage. There's the one kid who's willing to go there. The kid who's not there filling some sort of credit for the fact that he came to watch me speak, right? What he was asking me was, do you think that your chosen identities, you as a how old am I now? 28-year-old. Do you think the identities you've chosen are based out of or grow out of the identities that you were born with? And how much of the identities have you taken on do you think come from those things? So I guess my question for you is, in your life decisions of identities of the Sarah who you're trying to become, the identities that you're choosing, can you track those back to the identities that you were born with? And can you think of any off the top of your head right now?
Yes, I think so. And I think there's also the intentional decision to continue to pursue new identities also.
Oh, yeah.
So I would say that, yes, identities that I'm born with. I was born as a daughter. I was born as a sister. I was born as a family member. I was born as a, white, very, middle-class Californian. But I have Midwest parents. So it was just this really interesting medley to be in a very liberal state with very deep-rooted Midwest roots. Also. Sure. So that kind of played together. But then I also went to a private school in California. So I had all of these sort of really beautiful opposing influences which I think really helped ground me in that. And then we also grew up in the country outside that too. When you think of California, I think people like to idealize that like the entire state is like LA or the entire state is like the mountains, but it's not.
I think
There's
that
a lot
it's
of
all
country there.
Disneyland.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, Disneyland's great. But so I grew up out in the country, and so it just had all of these very like beautiful influences that I'm really appreciative of, because I feel like that really rounded me as a young adult. And my mom was very active in Rotary, and so we had gone to a lot of different events, and she was also like a working mother that had this amazing career, and then would take us to all of these different after school programs. I mean, no, not that. Like, she had lots of things that she was doing, which is again like why I do so many things, right? Because my mom is she's involved in all these different clubs and organizations, and she's like a mover and a shaker in our town. So then I have followed that too. But even with that, we went to a Rotary event, and I didn't want to go, but I couldn't drive home because I was too young. So I like begrudgingly, in my like, you know, angsty 13-year-old self was like, fine, I'll be here, and just like pouted somewhere. But with that, I met an exchange student who was here from Colombia. I thought it was amazing. And then I went to my mom, was like, hey, can I be an exchange student? And like 3 years later, I was in Italy. So just like how that continues to be all of these different identities that have come up, but like that comes from my mom, like that comes from who she was, that comes from the way that I was raised. So it makes sense that I'm doing a lot of things, but yes, so they are related. I don't know how to point my finger to that, in that there's still this progression to want it to continue to develop other identities. Like, I don't think that I've ever, like, the identity of the person that I am now, like, I probably won't be this person in another 10 years. I'm sure there's lots of different things that I will take on. But so I don't know how to pinpoint that one, but I would say that they're related.
Those are identities you're choosing to take on based off of this identity you were born with. One always does play off of the other, and it's fun to kind of try to look at that trajectory and tie it back to what cards were I dealt that now I'm making the decisions that I'm making. What does it trace back to? So cool. Thank you. Appreciate you diving in.
I appreciate the question. I appreciate that you found that question was so thoughtful, that you thought about it and found it important enough to want to bring up here and ask me. So thank you. I appreciate
you're
being
welcome.
a part of that.
Totally. Yeah, well, I feel like we should move on into our expert for the day. I'm super excited for our guest, as this man has shaped a lot of my mature thoughts on the ideas around disability. He's just so well-spoken and so well-written, and it's a treat to have him as our guest today. So, I am pleased to introduce to you today Lawrence Carter Long. Lawrence has been a modern dancer, radio show host, producer, and lifelong activist. His advocacy has been awarded by the likes of former NYC Mayor Mike Bloomberg and the American Association of People with Disabilities. Formerly the Public Affairs Specialist for the National Council on Disability, he joined the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund as the Director of Communications in 2017. In his communications work, Lawrence has both set up media coverage by numerous disability issues and has been interviewed by many respected outlets. Lawrence, welcome.
Thank you. I am absolutely thrilled to be here, and congratulations on this new endeavor. It's fantastic.
Thank you. We're excited. It's a steep learning curve, but we are certainly enjoying trying to figure out all the pieces. So we appreciate you joining us on that adventure. How's your day?
My day's been good. I started out writing a Japanese film director about a movie called 37 Seconds that was authentically cast with a young woman who has cerebral palsy and trying to find independence from her overprotective mother. I pivoted from that, writing folks at ITVS, which are sort of the feeders for Independent Lens and POV on PBS, about a project we've been doing, interviewing documentarians with disabilities. Answered a bunch of emails, which is not exciting, but an important part of the job. And wrapped the day up really having a meeting with our development director and our executive director, talking about plans for our annual fundraising event, which is coming up in the fall. And spent some of those emails earlier reaching out to people that we hope to get, which I don't want to jinx myself just yet, but I think what we're going to get is pretty exciting. So it's been a good, productive day, and what a perfect way to cap things off.
That is amazing. I love it. We were joking and kind of talking earlier before we started recording about inspiration porn, and I feel like the first actual question I'm going to ask you today is, would you please explain to people what inspiration porn is and why it's bad?
Well, it's a concept that came from Australia. Wonderful Stella Young, who did a show, she was in media, called Ramp Up. And anybody who's not familiar with Stella and her life and her work, sadly she's passed on, should just go to the Google and search her name and find the TED Talk that she did, which describes it far better probably than I ever could. But the basic idea behind inspiration porn is it's stories about disabled folks that are made for non-disabled folks, generally to feel better about themselves. And so disabled people are sort of centered more as objects, not the subjects of those stories. And what we want to do is shift that focus, shift that lens away from disabled folks being sort of thought of as the other, where we're telling the stories ourselves.
Right. At one point on there, I think she says that the problem with the inspiration porn is that it's like, oh, well, I think I have a bad day, but I could be that guy.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So again, they're making themselves feel better by using us as the, sort of before photo, right? The thing we don't want, right? Yeah. So the sad thing about that is most of the time, when disability is talked about, it's talked about in these with sort of polar opposites. You either get somebody who's heroic just for getting out of bed in the morning, or you're getting somebody who's tragic because they've had this horrible fate befall them in some way, shape, or form. And when you get to be as old as I am, I'm going to turn 52 in May. You discover that most people are neither one of those. Most people live a life somewhere in the middle. And the problem, I think, with inspiration porn, if you're able to kind of narrow it down and drill down that focus, is that it leaves out the vast majority of people. It leaves out those stories in the middle, and it leaves out the lives that people actually lead. So if you're getting this kind of skewed notion of what disability is, and those are the narratives that get repeated over and over and over again, not only is the world getting a jaundiced view, but disabled people are getting a jaundiced view too. They think they have to shoehorn themselves into this way or that way, and not understanding that there's so much more room in the middle that's probably not being explored.
Absolutely. So my immediate assumption, and so I guess I'm asking you a question, but it's my assumption question. I don't know. My assumption is the reason that there have been those two extreme narratives is because the people actually writing those narratives are people who don't have disabilities. Is that correct? And if it is, why has that been? And if it hasn't been, if I'm wrong, why? Why has that been the narrative? I guess is the actual question I'm wanting to ask.
Numbers bear that out. The science bears that out.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of reasons we could talk about why. A lot of it has to do with opportunities, socioeconomics, who gets the chance, who gets to go to university and develop that skill set, who gets the job opportunities, who gets hired, who doesn't, because of assumptions about disability. And so let's look at, my area of expertise really is film and TV. So let's look at that. So in 2016, there was a report from Stacy Smith and her colleagues at the Media Diversity and Social Change Initiative, and they looked at basically how Hollywood was doing. Where do we get our stories, right? Where do we see the stories? Most of it's film and TV. And what they discovered, they tracked, and I think this was very smart in their approach, who appears and who gets to speak in the most popular movies that were released since 2007, right? So in 2015, the first year they analyzed movies regarding representation of people with disabilities, they found, you ready for this number? I'm glad you're sitting down.
I don't know, I'm nervous.
They found that only 2.4% of characters in the top 100 movies who spoke or had actual names were disabled. And what's the problem with that? Well, the biggest problem with that is there's a significant gap between fiction and reality.
Yes.
If you look at the numbers that we can get from places like the Centers for Disease Control, and this was just in August of 2018, so fairly recently, what the CDC found, if you add it all up, right? So physical disabilities, this would be people with mobility issues, people who have amputations, people with sensory disabilities who are blind or deaf, folks who have intellectual disabilities, something like Down syndrome, psychiatric disabilities. You add all that up, and the CDC itself, the government agency, found that 22%, that's nearly 1 in 4 folks in the United States of America, have some form of disability and identify as such, that they're willing to report that information. What's that tell us? That tells us we've got nearly 20% gap there that we need to make up. And so if we're only seeing those tragic stories and we're only seeing those heroic stories, think about all of everything that's being left out there in the middle. And I think that's where the crux of the issue is. But what's changing now, and what I think is really quite fascinating and also long overdue, is that doing things like making your own podcast, having your own YouTube channel, gives real live disabled folks an opportunity to tell the stories that they want to tell. And that's changing the narrative just by our presence. It's changing the ideas and the concepts about what disability is and what disability can be, because we're occupying the space in ways that we've never been able to do before. So if a film director or a TV director makes a mistake, you could go right directly for that person and address them on Twitter, or you can address them on Facebook. They can't hide inside their ignorance anymore. And I think that that's a wonderful step forward.
That really is a wonderful step forward.
I like the phrase, they can't hide inside their ignorance. That's a beautiful phrase. I guess I'm...
Well, and it seems that all of us are in along some sort of spectrum, right? Somewhere in the spectrum of the stuff that we were force-fed, the notions and ideas that were expected of us, and hopefully at some point, in ways that aren't too painful, but usually are, folks wake up to the reality of that, right? People begin to understand that disability and life with a disability isn't all the nonsense that they've been fed or told or led to believe or expected, but that it's something else. And then they decide, okay, wait a minute, if I've been lied to, that means everybody else is being lied to, and then they've got to do something to change it. I was 35 years old before I came to that realization. And part of the reason that I do the kind of work that I do and focus primarily on media is because other people shouldn't have to wait that long.
What was it for you, if you don't mind me asking and you don't mind sharing, what was the wake-up call for you?
Not at all. I don't mind at all. It was the film $1 Million Baby. And for people that don't know anything about the film $1 Million Baby, I hate to give away the spoiler, but I think the word is out there about it now. It's about a woman who's a boxer who gets sucker punched during a particularly important bout in her career. And she falls, breaks her neck, hits a stool, the stool that you're supposed to sit on, becomes quadriplegic. And then she decides, basically the same injury that Christopher Reeve had, just to kind of give you perspective. She decides, because she can't be a boxer anymore, because she doesn't know any other disabled people, anybody who's been quadriplegic, because her family is just atrocious. There are a lot of different reasons that she'd rather be dead than disabled. Now, when I went to this movie, I'll be perfectly honest with you, I expected Rocky in a sports bra. I didn't know that there was any kind of like disability, anything in it. So I'm blithely going along my own business thinking I'm going to see this gender bending Rocky movie.
Yes.
And next thing you know, there's this whole third act that I didn't know about because I saw it the first weekend before I generally don't read reviews before I see movies because I want to get my own experience.
Sure.
And at the end of the movie, Clint Eastwood directed the film, and his character, he plays a character in the film who is her father figure. And he talks at one point about needing to put down his old dog, his dog who had gotten old and wasn't useful anymore. And that's basically what the Hilary Swank character, the lead in $1 Million Baby, decides because of her disability. And he kills her. This father figure kills her. So at the end of the movie, everybody else in the audience, or at least it seemed like everybody else in the audience, breaks into applause. They start clapping, and the light bulb went off above my head. The lightning bolt hit. I went, holy smokes. They think she's better dead than disabled.
Yeah.
And they probably think that about me too.
Yes.
Right? And so I was at first shocked, and then a dangerous thing happened. I got pissed off.
Yep.
It was like, wait a minute. how can that be the case? I had never really encountered that kind of thing before. I think I largely, because of my big mouth or my attitude or whatever it is, I could sort of pass as a non-disabled person, or I could at least approximate one to the degree that often stuff wasn't kind of put in my face. But the movie did it in such a way that I wasn't able to ignore it anymore. And I wasn't able to sit on the sidelines anymore. And I began asking myself, as a result of that catalyst, how can I get more involved? How can I be of use to the cause and to the community that up until that point I hadn't been involved with whatsoever? I didn't think I need to. I thought, other people are doing that advocacy. I can just go ahead and live my life. And I was wrong. And so luckily I had, a career of doing media-based work and public speaking for about 15 years before that happened, and was able to sort of transition and translate that to doing disability work in ways that I hope have been unique. But it was really that wake-up call that had me saying, wait a minute, if this, and I've always been a film buff. I was watching Laurel and Hardy movies when I was 5 years old before I could walk, on a little black and white TV in my room when I was a kid. So movies were always a way that I kind of processed the world. It was actually no surprise when I look back now to think that that it was a movie that kind of woke me up, was the catalyst for me finding disability community. And I just wonder, what if I had found disability community at 5 years old? How would my life have been different? There are people who had done the things that I had to figure out how to do on my own decades before. There was an independent living movement that started right here in Berkeley, where I live now, that they never taught me about in school.
Nope.
They didn't tell me anything about Judy Heumann or Ed Roberts or any of those people. And so I had to wait until I was an adult, and I had to seek it out myself before I found out those parts of our history, not only the disability community's history, but America's history.
Yes.
And so it sort of fueled that fire in me to say, well, what can I do using the skills that I have to bring that out into the open and to present it, right? To give it as a gift to more people.
Absolutely. And I
Right.
share this in a bit too, where I was working a flight and a fellow flight attendant was sort of asking me about my hand, right? Because that's something that comes up. Everyone wants to talk about, like, what happened. And so I was sharing it, and then she looks at me and she's like, well, it's not like this is anything anyone would want. And it was like, well, like...
Yeah, and how are you supposed to process that, right? Neither is this punch in the face, It's like, what do you think? How do you think I'm going to receive that? And there again, it's those assumptions, because they, every story they've gotten. Think about this. If you're consumers of media at all, right? Think of a movie, think of a TV show where the disabled person was being told that they should be expected to die or want assisted suicide, where they were fighting to live. Can you name me one? Can you give me one example? Right. No. And it doesn't exist. Right. So, and so if you look at the history, and I'm sort of an armchair historian, a populist historian when it comes to film and TV, there have been, to the best that I can identify, approximately 35, 36 movies, somewhere in there, I don't remember the exact number, since 1915, where people became disabled in some way, shape, or form, became ill in some way, shape, or form, and decided that they'd rather be dead, right? So again, if the narrative that you're seeing, 35, 36 movies about disabilities since movies began have been saying, oh, I'd rather be dead, people began to accept that as normal, right? That's the only story you've been told. Then they're thinking, well, yeah, if that happened to me, well, of course, I guess that's my only option. I should be dead. And because they probably don't know people who are, let's say, politically active or culturally active in disability circles, right? They didn't have the mentors, they didn't have the people that blaze that path, because we generally speaking aren't born into communities of disabled people. Disabled folks, generally speaking, are born into their regular families, whatever that is. Many of us has a regular family, and they generally don't have other disabled people or people who identify or who aren't culturally, politically, socially active in doing disability work. So you become this anomaly. You're an outlier. You have no one to learn the ropes from. You're not. If you grew up like I did. This was in Indiana in the 70s and early 80s. the thing that was drilled into my head, the message that got pushed over and over again was that I had to try to be normal.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so so that might sound okay on its surface, but you start breaking it down. What does it mean? It basically means don't hang out with other disabled people. Don't
Mm-hmm.
seek out other disabled people. Don't get to know other disabled people because they're not normal in that kind of context. And so you never get the opportunity to learn those things. And so that happened, right, for most of my life. And so I often come back to that idea. Well, what had happened? What would have happened? How would my life have been different? Again, if I had been surrounded by disabled people from the get-go. So one of the things that happens when folks reach out to me or speak to me, after a speaking engagement or a media appearance, is 80% of those, roughly 80% of those who are disabled become disabled later in life.
Yes.
Most of them aren't lucky enough to be born with a disability like us.
Mm-hmm.
So then again, you've got additional barriers to that. Because you've grown up with this concept of yourself as non-disabled in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Probably all you're wanting to do based on the messaging is go back to being normal, whatever that is,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so then you don't even seek out those individuals. And so I think there's a real value that disabled people can do, whether you were born with one or you acquired one later, sort of in showing people the ropes. But in order to do that, it's got to be valued and it's got to be something we push for in society.
Yes.
I love that. I think that's so beautiful. Where do we see media and representation going now? And kind of two-part to that, so I'll just ask you with it. How can we get involved? How can we be helpful? What should we as people with disabilities be doing in order to help make that change?
One, I think you're doing it. I mean, you're creating the media yourself. You're not waiting for anybody else to tell you how it's done or to give you permission. You're just throwing down the gauntlet and going, bam, here we are. So I think that's
I love
that's
gauntlets
really,
and I love throwing them.
that's what they're for, right? They're not really
That's
to
the only
drink out
reason
of.
they exist. Or if the holy grail to be found. That's the only other reason.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think don't wait. Essentially is what I'm saying, right? Don't wait for any of those things. Whatever you feel a compulsion, a passion to do that. Scratch that itch and find a way to make that a reality. I think technology has helped in some ways to make those types of things easier than they've ever been before. So take advantage of that. The other thing I think that's really important, and I've alluded to a couple of times now, but I don't think it can be said enough, is the opportunities and the willingness to find community, to seek out community, to learn the ropes from other people and to build those things where they don't exist. Even if it is, if you're in a isolated community or a rural community or whatever it might be, you can still find people online.
Yes.
You can still find folks who have had similar experiences to yours and learn from them. That's never been possible before either. So it's, you have the texts of fabulous books, you have videos of fantastic speeches, you growing daily in ways that can't be ignored anymore. So the thing that I would suggest is recognize that things are changing and that the expectations are different now, and then ask yourself how you can be useful in making that change even better. What is the thing that you want to do, and then find out, and who are the people who can help you do that, and then find them and just make it a reality. I think that's something that is possible now in ways that it wasn't done before. The other things I think that I would sort of recommend that people do is, if you have your $1 million baby moment, whatever that moment might be. Right?
I know Sarah has as well, and we know you have. So there's at least 3 of us who have.
Yeah, so don't hesitate to speak up or speak out, right? Don't be afraid to cause a righteous ruckus, because if you do, other people might just climb on board. So send that email, send that tweet, post on Facebook, tag important people, right? And the thing about the hashtag, which was fascinating to me is I just used it in a fit of anger. I didn't think about it. It wasn't a campaign. It wasn't anything that I'd planned. I just sort of put it out there because a list was made of all kinds of identity groups and advocacy groups in a pretty important speech that the president and somebody that I respected, President Obama, had given at the time. And disability was left out. Mm-hmm. And I was just tired of being erased. And I thought, what is it gonna take for us to be part of the mix?
Yes.
And so at the end of that little rant that I did both on Facebook and Twitter, I did the hashtag say the word. Disabled, all in capital letters with a period, say the word. Mm-hmm. And next thing I knew, like the next morning, I'm getting up and I'm seeing that my Twitter feed blew up and people in Australia were using it and people in Wales wanted to do an interview about it. And about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks later, NPR is sending me a note and I'm doing this NPR interview. And so I'm not, I don't think I'm the most original thinker in the world, but what I think happened was that I struck a nerve.
Yes.
That I tapped into something that was bigger than me,
yes.
that had a life of its very own. And I just happened to make a hashtag out of it. And the rest of the world just kind of ran with it in its own way. And so you never know where, and here I am talking about it 4 years later. So it's one of those things that whatever the thing is that strikes you, do it, right? Find a way to just put it out there in the world and see where it leads you, because you may never know.
Well, and Lawrence, your Say the Word campaign personally affected me as well. So thank you. It was during the time that I had my light bulb moment but was still trying to assemble the pieces of the puzzle to make it make sense. And it was during that time of me trying to make it make sense where I was meeting a lot of people and trying to understand and do different things and trying to come to terms with the word in the community. And I don't even specifically remember how I got my hands on the article, but when I read it, I was like, this is it. This is absolutely everything that I've been trying to say. And I knew that I was proud, and I knew that this community I was proud of, but I still I didn't understand the fact that what I had been taught about the word disability, I could separate that, and that's not what it meant. Mm-hmm. So I still was in that space of struggle, and you really helped me bridge that and understand the separation between the two. So yes, thank you for that.
I thank everybody who helped me wake up. It was, this really amazing synergy of different factors that just kind of boom converged at that moment and struck a nerve with people. And I'm just glad that it's been helpful. It seems to have been helpful to people. And I think that's really the most important thing, that if we can do that for each other, that's what community is all about.
Absolutely. Thank you. What are the best ways to, I guess, stomp our feet at Hollywood specifically when it comes to looking at media specifically?
I think recognize that
how do we start getting active?
The rules are changing there too, and it's happening beyond the disability community. Okay. But I think the disability community is finally leading the charge, right? So. Let's just look at the trends real quickly. The thing used to be, traditionally it's been the case, where if a non-disabled actor wanted to get an award, one of the things they would do to strut their stuff and show what they were capable of is play a disabled character. That method, which used to be pretty much fail-safe, has started to fall apart. And that says to me that not only are disabled people getting tired of the same stories over and over again, but non-disabled people are tired of that tragic, heroic, overcoming nonsense too. And so let's look at just some of the movies that have come out in the last year or so, right? So Skyscraper with The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, right, had the lowest opening of any of his movies in a number of years. Right. So it actually was released alongside Hotel Transylvania #3 and got its kicked in the theaters. Right. And so and you smell what I'm cooking here. So it's one of those things where it was the 31st highest grossing film of the year. worldwide. China's helped boost it a little bit in terms of box office. It did better in China than it did over here during its run, but it underperformed in terms of the movies that The Rock has made in recent years. And then we had movies like Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot, starring Joaquin Phoenix, arguably one of the best box office draws in the U.S., only got a limited release, also underperformed, right? Didn't make what people anticipated that it would make. Most recently, a movie like The Upside. Now, where you've got Bryan Cranston playing a disabled person, and his cohort, his co-star there is Kevin Hart, right? Whose movies had been really sort of doing gangbusters before this. So everybody anticipated that this remake of a French film called The Intouchables, sort of means outcasts, so in French, was going to be like the big hit of the season. And what they found was it opened strong. And then after the opening, it just kind of fell apart. It opened on the low side. Let's look at it. If people who were going, maybe not because they cared about Bryan Cranston or they'd ever seen Breaking Bad, but you look at the Kevin Hart films, and there were 3 different films, Get Hard, Right Along 2, Central Intelligence, that all opened at 35 million or more. When you look at the amount of money that The Upside made, it was just over 20 million. So even in that, you see that it didn't quite work. And Bryan Cranston, there was a huge controversy where people were taking him on Twitter and really challenging him taking that role in ways that really hadn't been possible before. So I think if you're just looking at the economics of it, right, you don't have to care about disability at all. I think that what that tells you is that those same worn out, tired stories that we've seen 100 times before aren't working anymore, and that audiences are bored with them too, and that they expect something a little more nuanced, something different, something that's more authentic. And I think that's a sign of progress.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Lawrence, we could talk to you forever. I want to be respectful of your time. So at this point, I would just love to thank you so much for joining us today. We so appreciate your time. We so appreciate your expertise, and we so appreciate your laughs. So thank you so much again, and thank you to our listeners for joining us today. We hope that we've given you information to help you go out there and disarm your disability. We'll see you guys next week. Bye!
We want to give special thanks to our network, Public House Media. For our intro beats, Jason Barnes at Cybernetics. For our logo art, Patrice, you can find him at normalpersons.com. And Matt Meldrum and Ryan Louie, our two-handed technical team. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or publichousemedia.org. Follow us on Twitter at DisarmDisable. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Disarming Disability. And check out our website, disarmingdisability.com. See you next week. Bye.